The desert town of Red Hollow had a way of swallowing people's attention the moment they arrived. Dust hung in the air like a permanent veil, and the sun seemed stuck in a harsh, unblinking stare. It was the kind of place where time didn't move forward. It just eroded everything slowly. Caleb arrived just before noon. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. Work had taken him through half-forgotten towns like this before. Places where people sold what they couldn't keep and left behind what they couldn't sell. He was used to auctions that felt more like funerals for old lives. The announcement board near the town hall read, "Estate liquidation auction. Everything must go." Broken wagons, rusted farming tools, collapsed sheds, a few animals no one wanted, and among the usual junk, something unusual had been added at the last minute. Abandoned Apache structure, starting bid $1. Caleb paused when he read it. An Apache structure wasn't something you normally saw at auction. The wording itself felt wrong, too vague, too careless. It wasn't listed as a home, not even as a historical artifact. Just structure, as if it were nothing more than scrap wood and old canvas. People around him chuckled as they walked past. "Probably just some old frame," one man muttered. "Or worse," another replied. "Locals say it was cursed land." Caleb didn't believe in curses, but he did believe in patterns, and this one felt off. He followed the crowd to the auction site, a dusty open field behind the town's abandoned railway station. Rows of items sat under the sun like forgotten memories: cracked trunks, broken furniture, rusted farming equipment. Everything looked like it had been pulled straight out of someone's life and dumped here without care. Then he saw it. At the far end of the lot stood the Apache structure. In fact, it looked like it had once been a small shelter or temporary dwelling, but time had worn it down brutally. The wooden frame was weathered to a grayish bone color. Torn fabric still clung to parts of it, fluttering weakly in the dry wind. One side had partially collapsed, as if something or someone had pushed through it long ago. But what struck Caleb wasn't its condition. It was how isolated it felt. Unlike the other items, this one wasn't grouped with anything else. It sat alone, as if even the auction organizers didn't want it too close to the rest. A faint circle of empty ground surrounded it, almost like people instinctively avoided it. The auctioneer climbed onto a makeshift platform. "All right, folks, last item of the day, some kind of abandoned Apache structure. Don't know much about it. Landowner cleared it out, didn't want it. Starting bid, $1. A few people laughed. Someone actually clapped sarcastically. 50 cents for firewood, a man shouted. More laughter followed. No one raised a hand. Caleb felt eyes on him, as if the crowd was waiting for someone foolish enough to acknowledge it. He should have ignored it too. That's what people like him did. Buy what had value, ignore what didn't. But something kept pulling at him. It wasn't logic. It wasn't even curiosity in the usual sense. It was the strange feeling that the structure wasn't just abandoned. It felt interrupted, like something had been left unfinished inside it. The auctioneer sighed. Going once. Caleb stepped forward. $1. The crowd quieted for half a second. Then someone laughed again, louder this time. "Seriously, you buying trash now, Drifter?" a voice called out. He just held his gaze on the structure. The auctioneer shrugged. Sold. $1. A few papers were signed quickly, almost carelessly. No one asked Caleb questions. No one seemed to care. In less than 5 minutes, ownership of the structure was transferred to him like it was nothing more than a broken chair. As the crowd dispersed, Caleb stayed behind. Now that he was closer, the structure felt even stranger. The wind moved through its gaps, producing a low, hollow sound, like a breath passing through ribs. The fabric wasn't just torn, it looked deliberately disturbed, as if someone had ripped sections from the inside rather than the outside. He walked around it slowly. There were marks on the ground near the entrance, Faint impressions in the dust, too small to be an animal, too deliberate to be random. He crouched down, brushing his fingers over the earth. Footprints, fresh enough that the wind hadn't erased them completely. Caleb frowned. "That doesn't make sense," he muttered to himself. If the structure had been abandoned, why would there be recent footprints? He stood up, scanning the surroundings. The town was already drifting back into silence, people disappearing into buildings and trucks. No one seemed interested in what had just been sold. To them, it was garbage removed from their sight. But Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that something inside that structure was still waiting. He exhaled slowly, pulling his work gloves tighter. "All right," he said under his breath. "Let's see what you are." He didn't know it yet, but that $1 purchase wasn't the beginning of a simple cleanup job. It was the moment something hidden finally had a chance to be found. By the time Caleb finished hauling the Apache structure onto his rented patch of land outside Red Hollow, the sun was already bleeding into the horizon. The desert shifted colors slowly, orange fading into bruised purple, like the world itself was exhaling after a long, harsh day. He set the structure down near a cluster of rocks that offered at least some shelter from the wind. It wasn't much of a property, just a flat, forgotten stretch of land with dry soil and scattered scrub. But it was quiet. Too quiet. Caleb worked alone. He tightened loose beams, checked weak joints, and removed broken sections of fabric that threatened to collapse completely. The structure was worse up close than it had looked at the auction. Age had not just worn it down, it had hollowed it out. Still, something about it bothered him in a way he couldn't explain. It wasn't just the damage. It was the feeling that the structure had been maintained recently despite its appearance. Certain parts of the frame were less dusty than others. Some knots in the wood looked freshly tightened, not rotted with age. "Doesn't add up," he muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. When darkness finally settled, Caleb decided to leave it as it was for the night. He set up a small lantern nearby, more out of habit than necessity, and retreated to a makeshift camp a few meters away. A tarp, a sleeping roll, and a metal canteen. That was his routine. The desert night arrived quickly, and with it came silence. Not the peaceful kind, the heavy kind, the kind that made sound feel dangerous. Caleb lay on his back, staring at the stars, listening to the wind brush against the structure. It creaked occasionally, but that was expected. Old wood always complained in the cold. He almost drifted off. Then, a sound. Almost. Careful. A step. Caleb's eyes opened instantly. He sat up slowly, scanning the structure. The lantern's light flickered, casting long shadows across the torn fabric walls. Nothing moved. He waited. Another sound followed, a faint rustle like cloth shifting against wood. Not wind, something more deliberate. Caleb reached quietly for the flashlight beside him. His grip tightened. "Hello?" he called out, voice steady but firm. No answer. Only silence returned, heavier than before. He stood up. The desert around him remained still, but now it didn't feel empty. It felt aware, like something inside the structure was holding its breath. Caleb stepped closer. Each footfall on the dry ground sounded louder than it should have. He stopped a few feet from the entrance. "Who's in there?" he asked again. This time there was no mistake. A faint movement inside. Not a large one, not aggressive. Just a shift, quick, nervous, like someone trying not to be seen. Caleb hesitated. Most logical explanations ran through his mind. Animal, stray dog, maybe even a kid from town hiding out for reasons he didn't understand. But none of them fit the feeling, pressing against his instincts. He moved the lantern closer. The light spilled into the structure's interior, revealing broken wooden supports, torn fabric hanging like dead skin, and a small hollow space near the center. and then he saw it. A blanket, folded tightly in the corner. Not old, not decayed. It was recent, dusty, but not abandoned. Caleb crouched slowly. His flashlight beam caught something else, a faint scattering of crumbs near the blanket. Or dried food. His chest tightened. "This can't be," he whispered. He shifted slightly, angling the light deeper into the structure. That's when he noticed it. A gap between two wooden panels. Not natural damage, not collapse. A hiding place. Before he could react, something moved inside it. Fast. A small figure recoiled deeper into the shadows. Caleb froze. His voice softened instantly. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." Silence. Then, a sound he didn't expect. Breathing. Shallow, uneven, frightened. A human breathing. Caleb lowered the flashlight slightly, trying not to blind whoever was inside. "I'm just looking," he said gently. "You don't have to be scared." A long pause followed. Then slowly, painfully slowly, the figure shifted forward. A small hand appeared first, gripping the edge of the wooden panel, then another. And finally, a girl stepped out. She couldn't have been older than 10 or 11. Her clothes were torn and dust-covered. Her face was smudged with dirt, her hair tangled and unwashed. She looked like she hadn't seen safety in a long time. Her eyes, wide and alert, locked onto Caleb with pure fear. She didn't speak. She didn't move closer. She looked ready to run at the slightest motion. Caleb lowered himself slightly, trying to appear less threatening. "I won't hurt you," he repeated softly. The girl flinched at his voice. For a moment, neither of them moved. The desert wind brushed through the structure, making the torn fabric sway like silent witnesses. Then suddenly, her knees gave out. She collapsed forward. Caleb rushed instinctively, catching her before she hit the ground. She was light, too light, and as he held her for the first time, one truth settled in his mind with terrifying clarity. This wasn't just an abandoned structure. It had been someone's hiding place. And she had been surviving inside it, alone. Caleb didn't move for several seconds. The girl was in his arms, but she felt unreal, like something too fragile for the world she had been surviving in. Her body was light, almost weightless, and her breathing was shallow, uneven, as if even that small effort cost her strength. For a moment, the desert around him seemed to disappear. There was only the soft sound of wind through torn fabric, and the distant hum of silence pressing in from every direction. "Hey," Caleb said gently, lowering her carefully onto the ground. "Stay with me. You're safe." She didn't respond. Her eyelids fluttered, struggling to stay open. Dirt clung to her cheeks, and there were faint marks on her wrists, not fresh injuries, but signs of long stress, gripping, hiding, and survival. Caleb reached for his canteen without hesitation. He poured a small amount of water into the cap and brought it near her lips. "Just a little," he murmured. At first, she turned her head away instinctively, as if even kindness was suspicious. But after a moment of hesitation, thirst overcame fear. She drank slowly, coughing slightly as the water went down too quickly. Caleb waited patiently, keeping his movements slow. "It's okay," he said again. "No one's going to hurt you." Her eyes finally opened more fully. They were sharp, too aware for someone her age. She looked at him like she was trying to decide whether he was real or just another danger disguised differently. Then she pulled back slightly, pressing herself toward the broken wooden frame behind her. Caleb didn't follow. He simply sat a few feet away, giving her space. Minutes passed. The desert night deepened. The lantern's light flickered again, casting long shadows that moved across the structure like silent observers. The girl kept watching him, as if expecting him to change at any second. Finally, in a voice so soft it almost disappeared into the wind, she spoke. "Who are you?" It was the first clear human sound she had made. Caleb exhaled slowly, relieved she was speaking at all. "My name is Caleb," he said. "I bought this place today." That made her flinch. Her grip tightened on the wooden frame behind her. "You bought it?" she repeated faintly. "Yes," he said carefully. "For $1. That detail confused her. She tilted her head slightly, as if trying to process what kind of person would buy something like this just to exist. Caleb noticed her reaction and added, "I didn't know anyone was here." Silence again. Then she lowered her eyes. For the first time, Caleb noticed how exhausted she truly was, not just physically, but in a deeper way. The kind of exhaustion that comes from being afraid for too long. Her voice came again, weaker this time. "They said no one would come back." Caleb frowned slightly. "Who said that?" The girl hesitated. Her fingers curled into the dirt. "The men," she whispered. The word alone changed the air. Caleb's expression tightened, but he kept his tone steady. "What men?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward the darkness beyond the structure, as if afraid even speaking about them might summon them. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "The ones who brought me here." Caleb's stomach tightened. He stayed quiet, letting her continue if she wanted to. After a long pause, she added, "They said I had to stay hidden. That if I left, they would find me." Her words were fragmented, but the meaning was clear enough to make Caleb's jaw clench. He looked around the structure again, not just as a broken shelter, but as something more disturbing. A place used deliberately, a place chosen. The blanket in the corner, the crumbs, the hidden panel. It wasn't random survival. It was organized hiding. Someone had put her here on purpose. Caleb's voice softened further. "How long have you been here alone?" The girl hesitated, counting silently in her mind. "I don't know," she said finally. "Many nights." That wasn't an answer. It was a confession of uncertainty, of time losing meaning when every day is the same struggle to survive. Caleb felt something uncomfortable settle in his chest. Anger, quiet, controlled, but real. He forced it down. Right now she needed safety, not emotion. He glanced toward his camp, a few meters away. "I have food," he said gently. "Not much, but enough for now. Do you want some?" She didn't answer immediately. Hunger, however, doesn't wait for trust. Slowly she nodded. Caleb stood carefully and brought a small ration packet from his supplies. He opened it and placed it near her instead of handing it directly, giving her control over the distance. She stared at it for a moment, as if unsure it was real. Then she grabbed it quickly and pulled it closer. She ate cautiously at first, then faster. Caleb looked away slightly, giving her privacy. The wind picked up again, brushing through the structure, but this time it didn't feel empty. Not just by her presence, but by the weight of everything she had endured inside it. After a while, she slowed down. Her energy slightly returned. She watched Caleb again, more cautiously now, but less afraid than before. "You won't tell them?" she asked suddenly. Caleb looked at her. "Tell who?" "The men." The question wasn't just fear, it was a test. Caleb shook his head slowly. "No, I won't tell anyone who doesn't need to know." She studied him carefully, as if trying to detect lies. Finally she lowered her gaze again. For the first time, she didn't look like she was about to run. But the danger was not gone. Because somewhere beyond the quiet desert, the world that put her here was still out there, and it didn't forget easily. The night deepened over Red Hollow, but sleep didn't come easily to Caleb. He stayed near the edge of his small camp, watching the Apache structure where the girl had retreated after eating. She hadn't gone far, just back into the shadows of the wooden frame, as if darkness itself was safer than open air. Every few minutes, he could hear subtle movement inside. A shift of fabric, a careful breath, the sound of someone who had learned to survive by staying unnoticed. Caleb sat with his knees drawn up, the lantern dimming beside him. The desert was quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet as before. Now it felt guarded, like something had been awakened. Inside the structure, the girl finally spoke again. "Are they gone?" she asked softly. Caleb looked toward her. "No one is here right now." A pause. "That's not what I meant," she said. Her voice carried something heavier than fear, something closer to memory. Caleb understood. She wasn't asking about the present. She was asking whether the past had stopped chasing her. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood and walked closer, stopping just outside the entrance. He didn't go in. He knew better than to crowd her space. "You don't have to talk about anything you don't want to," he said gently. "But if you do, I'll listen." Silence stretched between them. Then slowly she shifted into view. Her face was still dirty, but now it looked less like panic and more like exhaustion, as if holding everything inside her had finally become heavier than letting it out. "They said I wouldn't remember," she whispered. Caleb frowned slightly. "Remember what?" Her fingers traced patterns in the dust beside her. "The road," she said. "The ride. I don't remember where I was before that." Her voice trembled, but she continued. "There were voices, men talking. I was in the back of something, maybe a wagon. I don't know. It was dark." Caleb's jaw tightened. She wasn't just lost, she had been taken. He stayed silent, letting her continue. "They stopped somewhere far," she said. "I think they were arguing about what to do with me." Her breath caught slightly. "I heard one of them say I was trouble. Another said no one would come looking." Caleb's hand slowly curled into fists, but he forced himself to stay still. The girl continued, her voice fading in and out like a broken signal. "They brought me here," she said, "to this place, the old shelter. They told me to stay inside and not make noise." She looked up at Caleb briefly. "They said if I ran, the desert would finish me." Caleb's expression darkened. This wasn't abandonment. This was disposal. They hadn't left her in the desert by accident. They had placed her here like something to be erased slowly by isolation. He spoke carefully. "Did they give you food?" She nodded faintly. "Sometimes. Not always." That answer told him everything he needed to know. Controlled survival. Enough to keep her alive. Not enough to keep her safe. Enough to delay discovery, not prevent suffering. Caleb exhaled slowly, steadying himself. "How long ago was this?" he asked. The girl hesitated. "I don't know," she whispered again. "Time feels wrong here." That was the most disturbing part. Not just what had happened, but how long she had been forced to live without structure, without certainty, without even the comfort of counting days. Caleb stepped a little closer, lowering himself to sit on a rock near the entrance. "You're not staying here anymore," he said firmly, but gently. The girl looked at him quickly. "You can't leave," she said. "They'll come back." Caleb met her gaze. "Then we'll be ready," he replied. Her eyes searched his face again, trying to understand if he meant it, or if it was just another promise that would break later. But something about his tone didn't sound like comfort. It sounded like decision. A silence followed. Then, for the first time, she asked something different. "Why did you buy this place?" Caleb blinked slightly. The question caught him off guard. He looked around at the broken structure, the empty desert, the scraps of forgotten life. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "It was just $1. I thought it was nothing." The girl tilted her head. "Nothing," she repeated quietly. Caleb nodded. "That's what everyone else thought too." A faint, almost invisible expression crossed her face, something between confusion and irony. "Nothing," she said again, softer this time. Caleb realized then that to her, this place was not nothing. It had been her entire world. A prison disguised as ruin, a shelter disguised as abandonment, a place no one cared enough about to look twice at. And now, someone finally had. A sudden sound broke the moment. Not inside the structure. Outside, Caleb froze. The wind shifted, carrying something different now, dust being disturbed at a distance. Controlled movement. Footsteps. Faint, far away, but real. The girl noticed his expression change immediately. Her body stiffened. "They're here," she whispered. Caleb didn't move. He listened carefully. The sound wasn't close yet, but it was approaching from the direction of the road. Multiple sources. Vehicles, maybe, or men on horseback. It was hard to tell in the desert silence, but it was enough to confirm one thing. The past she was trying to escape had not stayed buried. It had followed her. Caleb slowly stood up. His voice was calm, but now sharpened. "Stay inside," he said. The girl shook her head instantly. "No, if they see you." Caleb interrupted gently, but firmly. "Stay inside." He looked at her once more, not as someone who had bought an old structure for $1, but as someone who had just inherited a responsibility he never asked for, but couldn't ignore anymore. Then he turned toward the darkness beyond the camp, and waited. The sound in the distance grew clearer. What had started as a faint disturbance in the desert air had become something undeniable. Low rumbling engines cutting through the silence, mixed with the crunch of tires over dry earth. Dust shifted on the horizon, barely visible at first, then slowly forming into moving shapes against the night. Caleb stood still near the edge of his camp, his body angled slightly forward, listening. The Apache structure was behind him, where the girl had retreated the moment he told her to stay hidden. She hadn't argued this time. That silence worried him more than her fear. Because now she understood something too. This wasn't imagination. It wasn't memory. It was real. The vehicles stopped at a distance, not close enough to be seen clearly, but close enough that the engines shut off one by one, leaving behind an unsettling quiet that felt even heavier than noise. Caleb exhaled slowly. He counted at least 2, maybe 3 sources. Men. He didn't know who they were yet, but he already understood enough. These weren't travelers, not lost drivers, not curious locals. They were searching. Behind him the girl whispered from inside the structure, barely audible. "They found me." Caleb didn't turn around. "Stay quiet," he said softly. A pause. "I told you," she said, her voice shaking. "They always come back." Caleb tightened his jaw. He stepped forward into the open desert, just a few meters from the structure, placing himself between it and the direction of the approaching figures. The lantern light behind him flickered weakly, casting his shadow long and thin across the sand. Then he called out. "I don't know who you are," he said firmly, "but you're on private land." Silence answered him. For a moment, nothing moved. Deliberate. 3 figures emerged from the darkness, walking in a loose formation. Their faces were hard to see at first, but their posture said enough. Confident, unhurried, like they believed they had the right to be here. The man in the center stepped forward slightly. "You're standing in the wrong place, friend," he said. Caleb didn't respond immediately. He studied them instead. Dust-covered clothes, travel-worn gear. Not bandits exactly, but not innocent either. There was a practiced ease in how they moved, the kind that came from doing something similar more than once. The man tilted his head. "We're looking for something," he continued. Caleb's voice stayed calm. "There's nothing here." A faint smirk crossed the man's face. "Oh, we think there is." The air shifted. Behind Caleb, the structure creaked slightly as the girl moved, just a small sound, but enough. One of the men's eyes flicked toward it instantly. "There," he muttered. Caleb stepped slightly to the side, blocking their line of sight. "That's not yours," Caleb said. The man in the center sighed, as if this was inconvenient rather than serious. "You don't understand," he replied. "That girl doesn't belong out here on her own." Caleb's stomach tightened. So they weren't guessing. They knew. The second man stepped forward. She ran, We're just here to correct a mistake. Caleb's voice dropped lower. A mistake? The first man shrugged. She wasn't supposed to leave where she was kept. The words hit the desert air like something poisonous. Kept. Not lost. Not rescued. Kept. Caleb's expression hardened. Inside the structure, the girl's breathing quickened. He could hear it now. Small, panicked, trying not to make noise. The men noticed his silence and took it as hesitation. "We'll take her and go," the leader said. "No trouble for you." Caleb finally shook his head once. "No," he said. A pause. The leader frowned slightly. "No?" Caleb stepped forward half a pace. "She's not going anywhere with you." The desert seemed to freeze at those words. The men exchanged looks. Then the leader sighed again, this time losing patience. "This isn't your problem." Caleb's voice sharpened. "It is now." A beat of silence followed. Then the second man moved, just slightly toward the structure. That was enough. Caleb stepped fully into their path. "You take one more step," he said quietly, "and this becomes something none of you want it to be." The words weren't loud, but they carried weight. The men stopped. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across their faces. Not fear exactly, but calculation. Deciding whether he was bluffing or serious. The leader studied Caleb carefully. "You don't know what you're getting involved in," he said. Caleb answered without hesitation. "Neither did you when you left her here." That line changed the air again. The desert wind picked up slightly, carrying dust between them like a slow-moving veil. From behind Caleb, the girl whispered again, "Please don't let them take me." It was barely a sound, but it broke something in him. Caleb didn't look back. He didn't need to. "I won't," he said. The men stiffened, and for a brief moment it looked like everything might explode into violence. Tension pulled tight like a wire about to snap. Then the leader raised a hand slightly. "Last warning," he said. Caleb didn't move. The silence stretched. Then, a distant light appeared on the road behind the men. Another set of headlights. Approaching. The men turned slightly, distracted for just a moment. That was all Caleb needed. He didn't chase. He simply moved back toward the structure in one controlled step, placing himself fully between the girl and any line of sight. A shield made of nothing but presence. The second vehicle grew closer. The men hesitated now, uncertain, watching the new arrival. The leader muttered something under his breath. "This isn't over," he said finally. Caleb didn't respond. The men slowly backed away, retreating toward their original vehicles as the approaching lights neared. Within moments, the desert swallowed their presence again. Gone, but not finished. Caleb stayed still until the sound of engines faded completely into the distance. Only then did he turn slightly. Behind him, the girl stepped out of the structure for the first time since the confrontation ended. Her eyes were wide. "You didn't leave," she whispered. Caleb looked at her. "No," he said quietly, "I didn't." And for the first time since the dollar auction, the desert didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a boundary had been drawn. The desert stayed quiet, long after the vehicles disappeared. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the cautious kind. The kind that follows something dangerous leaving, where every sound feels delayed, like the world is waiting to see if it's truly over. Caleb remained where he stood, between the Apache structure and the empty horizon. His body was still tense, his breathing steady but controlled. The night air had cooled slightly, carrying the last traces of dust stirred by the confrontation. Behind him, the girl had stepped fully out of the structure now. She didn't come closer at first. She just stood there, small against the vast emptiness of the desert, looking at Caleb like she was trying to understand what had just happened, and whether it was real. "They left," she whispered again, almost like she needed to hear it out loud to believe it. Caleb nodded once. For now. That, for now, carried more truth than comfort. The girl looked down at the ground, her fingers nervously twisting the edge of her torn sleeve. The adrenaline that had kept her upright was fading now, leaving behind exhaustion, deep, bone-heavy exhaustion that made even standing feel difficult. Caleb noticed immediately. "Sit down," he said gently. She hesitated, not because she didn't want to, but because even simple instructions still felt uncertain to her. Then slowly, she lowered herself onto a small rock near the structure. Caleb walked back toward his camp and returned with a blanket. Not new, not perfect, but clean. He placed it beside her, without forcing it onto her. "You can use this," he said. She stared at it for a moment, then pulled it closer, like something fragile. For a while, neither of them spoke. The desert filled the silence instead, the faint rustle of wind, distant shifting sand, and the soft creak of the old structure behind them. Finally, distant headlights appeared again. Caleb tensed slightly, but this time they weren't aggressive. The vehicle slowed as it approached his land, stopping at a respectful distance. A white SUV. From it stepped two figures. One wore a uniform. Local authorities. The other appeared to be a social worker or investigator. Calm posture, clipboard in hand, scanning the area carefully. Caleb exhaled slowly. It wasn't over, but it had shifted into something else now. Something controlled. The officer approached first. "Are you Caleb?" he asked. Caleb nodded. "Yes. We got a report about suspicious activity in this area," the officer said, glancing toward the structure. Then his eyes softened slightly when he noticed the girl sitting nearby. "Is she the one?" Caleb looked at the girl briefly before answering. "Yes." The investigators stepped forward gently, lowering their voice. "We're here to help her." The girl stiffened immediately at the word help. Caleb noticed and spoke softly, without looking away from her. "It's okay," he said. "They're not like the others." That didn't erase her fear, but it softened it just enough. The investigator slowly crouched a few feet away, careful not to invade her space. "We won't touch you," they said gently. "We just want to make sure you're safe." The girl didn't respond, but she didn't run either. That small stillness meant more than words. Caleb stepped slightly back, giving them room. For the first time since buying the structure, he wasn't the center of the situation anymore. He had become the bridge that connected it. The investigator asked quietly, "How long has she been here?" Caleb glanced at the structure behind them. "I don't know exactly," he admitted, "but she's been surviving inside that thing alone." The officer's expression hardened slightly. "We'll handle this properly." As they began their careful process of speaking with the girl, checking her condition, and preparing next steps, Caleb stepped away a little further, giving them space to work. He looked at the Apache structure again, the same structure that had been sold for $1. The same structure people had laughed at. Now it wasn't just debris. It was evidence, a hiding place, a witness to something no one had bothered to see. The wind moved through it one last time, and for the first time it didn't sound empty. It sounded finished. Later, as the authorities prepared to leave with the girl safely in their care, she hesitated near the vehicle. She turned back toward Caleb. Her face was still tired, still marked by everything she had endured. But something had changed in her expression now. Less fear, more awareness. "Will I see you again?" she asked quietly. Caleb paused. He wasn't sure what the answer should be. Life rarely offered clean continuations after moments like this. But he gave her the only honest answer he had. "I don't know," he said. Then after a pause, "But you're safe now. That's what matters." She nodded slowly, as if storing that answer somewhere important. Then she was helped into the vehicle. As the SUV drove away, its taillights fading into the desert road, Caleb stood alone once again. The Apache structure remained behind him, no longer a mystery, no longer a burden. Just a reminder. of how something bought for nothing can sometimes hold everything that matters. He looked down at the empty ground where everything had started. $1. That's all it cost. And yet somehow, it changed everything.